Good evening, everyone. How are you? All right. I'm grateful to be here myself. Want to say hello to everyone. My name is Damon Phillips, and I have the honor of being on the faculties of Columbia Business School and Wharton. And I say that because it has a lot to do with why I'm here today and why this event is happening here at CBS. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. First thing, from the perspective of business schools, it's only natural that we examine and interrogate the role of the private sector in all things, but especially around understanding the system of incarceration in the US. Not only the role of the private sector in perpetuating it, but also as being a way to remedy some aspects of that crisis. But more specifically, I'm here because the Tamer Institute for Social Enterprise and Climate Change, we started this work about 9 years ago. I didn't realize it was that long ago. It recently occurred to me. And we launched this program called REAP, which is the Reentry Acceleration Program. And REAP is the business school's way of complementing the long-standing work on mass incarceration that's been done all across the campus here at Columbia. REAP in particular has two components. There's a course that we teach. It's called Reforming Mass Incarceration and the Role of Business. If you want to know what it's about, the title sort of describes, I guess. But we first think about mass incarceration, but we also are very solutions-oriented in what we do. We also have programs. And some of those programs are teaching business education inside prisons, Bedford Hills, and Sing Sing in particular with our children and the Osborne Association as our partners. Also, if some of you might be familiar with Justice Through Code and Startup Works or other programs that have come out of REAP. Now, I mentioned our children and the Osborne Association as partners. We also have a lot of partners, even those, and including those that have been a part of putting this event together. So I want to just also give a thanks and a shout out to the School of Journalism that's here, and also the Center for Justice here at Columbia. Now, we're here to discuss the book, Private Industry and How It Works and Who It Profits. Now, when we started working on REAP, eventually I heard about this woman named Bianca Tylek, and had the pleasure of meeting her and inviting her to class. And let me just sort of say the project, and which is culminated in this book, the best way I would describe it is unprecedented. So while the term prison industrial complex, it's been around for many years, many of us are limited in our understanding of it. And most people would say, oh, you mean private prisons, right? And especially currently, that would be something that people might say. So this book addresses that collective deficiency we have about the understanding of what we call, when we say prison industrial complex, what we mean. And again, not only to understand the problem, and the problem from the perspective of not only people who are directly ensnared, but their families and loved ones who are also captured in this, but also sort of think about solutions. So for the past 6 years, Bianca has come to my classes and has been just a huge inspiration to my students. And I don't know whether there are any in the room. And to say that her work has been impactful to students is an understatement. And so I'm going to give you a sense of this. I'm going to read a little bit from a personal reflection that a student in my class said after Bianca visited and read parts of the book. And as I read it, you're going to be like, did Bianca pay her? No, she was not paid for this. This is not a paid advertisement. This is someone who at the time didn't even know was going to share this. I asked them earlier today if it was okay, and they gladly said yes. On March 27th, Bianca Tylek shared her journey and the transformative work of Worth Rises. From the outset, it was clear Bianca is a powerhouse. A recurring theme in her talk was this: incarceration is not merely a system of punishment, it's also a complex and profitable industry with over 4,000 companies involved across sectors like telecom, food, healthcare, and labor. Many corporations exist solely to serve prisons and jails, out of public view and without accountability. Even basic human needs are commodified, leading to gross exploitation of incarcerated people and their families. Bianca's talk consistently circled back to one central concept: power. Who holds it, how is it used, and how it can be reclaimed. While Bianca does not shy away from bold or confrontational tactics, she is equally committed to ethical boundaries and values-based leadership. Her work offered a compelling lens through which to examine systems change, advocacy, and the calculated use of disruption as a force for justice. Bianca's presentation was more than informative, it was transformational. So that's just a piece of what was a 3-page personal reflection. The assignment is to write a paragraph. But this is not unusual. I picked one from this particular semester. These happen all the time when people get encountered with this work and understand the work that's being done through Worth Rises and represented by the book. That was not the official intro. But I do want to share it because it's important. So Bianca Tylek is the author of The Prison Industry, How It Works and Who It Profits. She's also the founder and executive director of Worth Rises, a national organization working to dismantle the prison industry and end the exploitation of those it touches. More than one of the nation's leading experts on the prison industry, Bianca has wreaked havoc on it through her brilliant advocacy, strategies, and tactics. In prison telecom alone, her work has revolutionized the market and to date provided 300,000 incarcerated people with access to free communication, saved their families more than $500 million, and generated over 2 billion additional call minutes. She has blocked mergers in the space, inspired divestment, limited access to capital, and removed corporate executives from the boards of cultural institutions. Beyond telecom, Bianca has blocked financing for prison construction, challenged the malicious bankruptcies of prison healthcare providers, pressured corporations to stop facilitating death penalty executions, and still more. Bianca's work has been featured on the TED stage and covered by the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, CNN, NPR, Bloomberg, and others. So that's, for those who don't know, that's Bianca. And you will hear from her in a few minutes, but first we're going to hear from another person that we're honored to have the presence of, and that's Jelani Perez. And he's one of the voices that are lifted up in the book and in the chapter on architecture and construction. So this evening, we're honored to have the opportunity to hear the words that he shares in the book. Let me tell you a little bit about this impressive brother who, by the way, is his birthday. Jelani Perez is the director of the U.S. Prisons Program at the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, where he advocates for an end to solitary confinement through a faith-based framework. He represents NERCAT in the National Unlock the Box campaign and the Federal Anti-Solitary Task Force. Jelani is a nationally recognized criminal justice reform advocate, public speaker, and thought leader on ending torture and inhumane treatment in the U.S. prison system, whose work has been featured in USA Today, the Chronicle Philanthropy, and other news outlets. Jelani proudly serves as an ambassador for the End the Exception campaign to end prison slavery, and he's on the board of the National Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration, Justice Aid, New York City's Urban Justice Center, and The Appeal. So I invite up here to the stage Jelani Perez.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Nice. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. During the 13 years that I was incarcerated, I spent 3 years in solitary confinement in increments from anywhere between 3 to 10 months, all for minor infractions. Solitary is devoid of human contact and so much more: light, sound, and color. My gray cells had just one interior-facing window with frosted glass. It was the same window in which guards served me the meals that helped me assess whether it was morning or night. Breakfast was at 7 a.m. and dinner was at 4 p.m. every single day. And solitary was quiet, so quiet that you can hear small animals outside in the yard, you can hear your own heartbeat, and yes, even your own thoughts. I found inspiration any way that I could. I read the Bible, the only text I was allowed many times, at least 10 times over the course of my entire sentence. Other times, I read the ingredients on the toothpaste and other products that I could have. Desperate for human connection, I shouted through the vents to other people held in solitary units, forging deep bonds with people whose faces I never saw. When I was younger, I sat in solitary blaming myself with this sense of hostility. And as I grew older, these thoughts morphed into anger, and I questioned how such a space could even exist in the first place. Who conceived of it? Who designed it? Who built it? Who condemned me to it? I'm home now, but years later, I'm still acclimating to life outside. Small spaces like public bathrooms trigger memories of solitary. Nightmares about being incarcerated again sometimes creep into my sleep. And despite it all, hope drives my dedication to criminal justice advocacy. And in my role today, I advocate for not only ending solitary confinement, but also teach and train others who experience the same to do the same. So thank you for being here. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. A well-designed, humane prison is a perverse fallacy. No number of architectural bells and whistles can change the fact that a more modern cage is still a cage. The average size of a correctional cell, the closest thing to personal space an incarcerated person has, and must at times still share with one or two others, is not much larger than the size of a parking space. Walls, floors, doors, and gates are constructed with the coldest of building materials, an assortment of stone, cement, cinder, iron, and steel. Natural light is limited to what passes through barred windows, even in facilities with no outdoor spaces. Toilet and shower stalls are built without doors or curtains. Visit rooms are designed to prohibit contact with loved ones. And all these indignities are explained away with one claim: security. The worst manifestation of this torture architecture is a solitary confinement cell, a box often the size of an elevator in which people are confined for 22 to 24 hours a day. These cells are designed to remove human contact. A single slot in a metal door serves as the pass-through for food, mail, sound, and even light. On any given day, over 122,000 people nationwide are tortured in solitary, and many will spend weeks, months, years, and even decades there. The use of solitary confinement in the United States has been condemned by the United Nations and human rights organizations for its severe psychological effects, and yet architects, engineers, and contractors continue to design and build these spaces. In recent years, architecture, engineering, and construction firms have changed the narrative around their role in prison construction, moving from silence to hyperbolic claims that they design facilities that minimize dehumanization and promote rehabilitation. They gloat about wall murals of naturescapes and floor glazing that extends the reach of natural light as they design expansion projects meant to facilitate incarceration.
Thank you, Johnny and Bianca. So we now have the opportunity to have a discussion featuring both Johnny and Bianca. The moderator for the discussion, Dean Jelani Cobb, is one of the most important voices not only at Columbia, but nationwide. Jelani Cobb is the Dean of the Columbia Journalism School, a staff writer of The New Yorker, and a political analyst for MSNBC. He received a Peabody Award in 2020 for his PBS Frontline film, Whose Vote Counts, and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Commentary in 2018. He is the author of The Substance of Hope, Barack Obama and the Paradox of Progress, and To the Break of Dawn, a freestyle on the hip-hop aesthetic. Dean Cobb is also the editor or co-editor of several volumes, including The Matter of Black Lives, a collection of the New Yorker's writings on race, the Essential Kerner Commission Report. And finally, he is the producer or co-producer on a number of documentaries, including Lincoln's Dilemma, Obama, A More Perfect Union, Policing the Police, and The Riot Report. Please welcome to the stage Dean Jelani Cobb, Johnny Perez, and Bianca Tylek.
Good evening. Y'all can do better than that. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. So this is, a topic that over time, I've been able to see a kind of elevation of the kind of public understanding of it. That people now have some sense of the injustice connected to, what we refer to as the criminal justice system. That said, there's a lot in this book that most people do not know. A lot in the book that I did not know. And so I want to start at the most fundamental place, which is, where did this book come from? And how did you conceive of the idea that we actually need a book that explains how there are so many industries and organizations and companies that are making tremendous profit off of human misery?
Ooh, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I think this book was years and years and years in the making, and I want to start by saying a big thank you to my team at Worth Rises that contributed much of the research and information and a lot of citations, if you picked up the book, 50 pages worth, to make sure that we told the story and we told the truth. I want to thank people who shared their story, like Johnny and others who were impacted by this system, as well as all those who have been impacted who are in this room, and others who, for whom this book is close, can be triggering, can be a lot of other things. I want to also thank one of the closest people to me. Thank you, Mom and Dad, my sister, who are also in this space. And so this book, I think, as I said, years and years and years of research that needed to go into the meticulous articulation of what the prison industry is. As Professor Phillips was saying up on the podium, many people, when they think about the prison industry, just think about private prisons, and that's the extent of the understanding, right? If you watch, there's some pop culture references to things like expensive phone calls, and you're like, oh, okay, there's this other, sort of nefarious sector that's operating. But the truth is that the prison industry is an $80 billion industry, and we don't know the half. It is a tip of the iceberg type of discussion that we truly have in the public consciousness, and it is so often that we sit down as those who do this work and often are met with absolute shock and awe, right, about what is actually happening in this industry. And so it was through that we realized we need to actually capture this narrative and tell this story. And the truth is that this book could have been 2 times or 3 times as long for us to really get to even a broader picture of what the industry is, and more importantly, tell even more stories and more sort of facts about the harms that are committed. And so, I think for me, it was the importance of having people understand, because the root of getting to change is first being informed.
So I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the architecture, since we were just talking about that. And, Johnny, your experience in solitary, you just read, from that excerpt. Have you seen any change in public awareness around that particular dynamic of solitary?
Thanks for that question. I think on some levels, yes, and on many levels, no. The kind of like to your point about pulling getting that macro view. For those who've never been in solitary, what I described was all within a space that if I stretch both of my hands out, you can touch both walls. And a lot of these places don't have windows, but a lot of these prisons are also not in communities where the people who are incarcerated are from. It's really easy to disappear people, to cut off their communication, or to even design a place that is already inherently designed to devoid these people of their humanity. Or I slept on a 1-inch thick mattress for 13 years, 13 summers, if you will, 13 Christmases. At one point in my sentence, I really began to question the architecture in a way that it just seems intentionally cruel. Like when you have a window that's facing a brick wall, you're like, what's the point of the window? So much so that I want to say in 2021, part of our efforts led to the American Institute of Architects ethics committee making a decision that if they are to design, any architect designing places designing these places specifically to be used for harm and torture, specifically death row and places of solitary, to be deemed unethical. Many groups have been using these decisions to actually fight the construction of these places. During COVID, we saw funds actually being used to construct prisons and things like that. And I'll say something before it gets lost. Been working on solitary for over 10 years now. I've been home for 13 years, and yes, today I turned 46. And part of what I always try to make sure is that people understand that not only is solitary used to enforce almost every other policy within these systems that really serves to harm people, including the 13th Amendment and forced labor, which we'll get into. But there are people there right now. So as we work to keep people from going there and keep people from coming back, this is a mechanism in which completely dehumanizes the human existence. And it doesn't just impact the individual, it breaks the body, it breaks the soul, it breaks the community. So while we've seen some decisions being made, right, some of these decisions don't have teeth in some ways and unenforceable. We find that the opposition find ways to get around it and still exploit people in their entire communities, and, dare I say, in the last 2.5 years, in places where we've seen a lot of change, we've seen also some retraction in different ways, if you will. So it's kind of like a complicated response, if you will, so thanks.
If I can jump in, on this issue of like architecture and construction, right? If we zoom out just one level from solitary confinement to the entire buildings, right? The entire infrastructure of incarceration, there have been some other wins that I think are always important to talk about, because it's easy to read this book and feel very dark. There's a lot of just harm and pain that you can sense over and over, but to know that it is for the purpose of good and creating change. In Alabama, you were just talking about the money that they used towards COVID, or for COVID, and COVID relief was used in some cases to actually build prisons, because that was some kind of response. In the state of Alabama, they actually...
In the state of Alabama, my people are from Alabama. In the state of Alabama, it is a perfectly reasonable response to a virus. The virus needs to be locked up.
Yeah.
We need to get tough on these viruses.
Right. And so in Alabama, they went a step further, though. They didn't just use COVID relief funds. They reappropriated $100 million of funds for schools because they were building a school in a prison. That was their justification for why Department of Education funds should be used for construction. And this was a response when we successfully managed to stop the financing of a 3-mega prison project that was set to build over 4,000 new beds in the state of Alabama. And what had happened, and if you build them, they will fill them. And what happened there was because the DOJ came into the state, said this is a violation in basically every right. They wanted to put a consent decree on the state. The state was like, well, just build a new prison. And the DOJ was like, well, actually, the prison is not your issue. You incarcerate too many people. The culture of these institutions, this Department of Corrections is your problem. And so their response was still, nevertheless, let's build new prisons. And we attacked the financing source, which at the time, since we're in a business school, I will just say, we went after the investment bankers behind the deal. And that was Barclays at the time. We sent 17,000 emails to the investment bankers over 2 days. We made their computers completely and utterly unusable. And Barclays backed out of the deal 2 days later.
So I guess there's something else that I think is important because, I mean, the book is difficult in some regards to read because there is so much callous profiteering on the misery of human beings. But also, one of the things that I found to be really important in the book is that it is kind of sprinkled with examples of how people have, against great odds, managed to win reforms or to push back. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this. You just talked about 17,000, emails. But what are the steps that other people have taken? What, if anything, do you see that people have in common, people who've been successful, in achieving some degree of reform around this? What have you noticed that is useful for people who are sitting down right now saying, what can I do?
I'll go ahead and jump in there. In New York, we ended the practice of prolonged solitary confinement. It took us 9 years to do that, right? And now we're still in the implementation stage, and we've even seen officer strikes undermining efforts and implementation there and blaming it on the change there, and we can go into that. The consistent thing that I've seen, I think, across movements, I think not just in my limited experience of 10 years, but I think when you look across all kinds of movements for social change, is that you do hear the empowerment of those who's been most impacted by it. And I think when you're trying to advocate for people that are currently incarcerated, that means that you have to empower the families of the people, and we all know somebody who's been touched by the system in some way, shape, or form. So we've seen the consistent leadership of those impacted by the issue, and also our legislators. I have to name, in a time where, political affiliations tend to flow back and forth, those who have maintained instead the course. Like I said, it took 9 years, and we've seen similar successes in other states. And the last thing I think I say, when people, I think that when movements are able to show how they're all interconnected, we're talking about the profiteering of prison here, which also ties to our solitary enforcement, but we're also talking about, reentry, right? We're talking about, family reunification. Does somebody have the right to still talk to their family, while still being held accountable? Because we can talk about that too. So I think just the culmination and the synergy between, the different policies that need to change and the amplification of those most impacted by it directly or by family has been consistent in what I've seen in my work.
Yeah, I would add that I think there are 3 things that really make folks successful. I think it's strategy, perseverance, or persistence, and adaptability. I think you have to have a strategy. You have to be thoughtful. You can't, especially in our movement, we don't have the resources of those who are named in the book, right? We have, billionaires moving around crazy amounts of money to try to push back on us. And so we don't have those resources. We got a team of 10 people and got to figure out what to do. And so I say we don't have enough resources, time, or energy to just throw things at the wall, throw spaghetti at the wall and hope it sticks. No, you have to sit down and meticulously really lay out your strategy and your tactics. I think secondly, you have to have persistence, which is to say everything doesn't happen overnight. Things take 9 years. And if you abandon them the first time you lose or the first time the longer it takes, then you've thrown out years of work. And so I think having faith and having persistence or perseverance in your strategies is necessary. And then finally, you have to have adaptability, because the reality is that what works today may not work tomorrow. And we're learning a lot of that right in this moment with the political environment. And so while persistence is important, knowing when to pivot, when to pause, when to shift a little bit, the nuances of different strategies is key.
I'll name something too, and I'm almost contradict myself. Ready for this? When I talked about amplifying the voices of those most impacted. Because sometimes those are the voices who are also most under attack. So maybe sometimes it's not right for us to lead. And so sometimes it's like being strategic. It's about who should be saying what at the right time. Because sometimes I can't be protected the way that maybe other allies can. So you just have to name that there's people in this room that can say things out loud that I can't say without changing anything else. Let that sit for a second.
That's very real. One of the most disturbing chapters is on labor and the exploitation of labor in the system. And I wonder if you could just talk about, obviously this is something that has a very long lineage in American history. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that has evolved, where it comes from, and what the nature of labor exploitation in the system, what it looks like at this moment.
Yeah, I'll jump in with a framework, and I know Johnny has a lot to share on this. So I think to start, we did some polling and we learned that 88% of Americans do not know that there's an exception in the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, for all those who aren't familiar, is the amendment that purported to abolish slavery. Within the 13th Amendment, there's a really convenient exception clause that says except as punishment for a crime, which means that in our nation, slavery is absolutely legal, and that anybody in this room or anywhere else in our nation can absolutely be subjected to slavery so long as you've been convicted of a crime, which, there's a lot of ways to get into that category. And so what that means is that a lot of what we did after 1865 was move the institution of slavery behind prison walls where they're very opaque, where we don't go in and see, where there's no oversight, where journalists aren't allowed, in many states electeds aren't allowed, and sure as hell the taxpayers, even though you pay for it, you also aren't allowed. And we watch exploitation happen in those places at really extreme levels for both government agencies and institutions as well as for corporations and the like. I think there are a lot of different ways that prison labor exists, and certainly we can talk about everything from farm work to sort of prison industries, which I know Johnny will share some examples. But what I want to sort of just share to make sure folks know is that when you think about supply chain, it is all the way from the beginning to the end, right? A lot of times we think of prison labor as just an issue around the specific corporations or governments that use prison labor, but it is up and down from there. And what I mean by that is nearly every single license plate in the United States is made in a prison. And there is a company that makes a ton of money sending all the raw materials into that prison. They may never use the prison labor themselves. They may never buy the product at after the manufacturing, but they are invested in that cycle continuing, right? That company is 3M, the company that makes Post-its, right? Which you are all familiar with. And they don't just send a bunch of sheet metal and laminates and everything into the prison. They also help prisons and jails set up manufacturing plants for license plates in their facilities. And then they go to state capitals and they advocate for laws that make you have more license plates. So if you've ever been in a state where it's like, well, all of a sudden I had to go from having a license plate on one side of my car to both sides of my car, or from having to replace it every 2 years or every 4 years to every 2 years, it's because somebody is profiting off prison labor, that you are being subjected to that. And so that's the beginning, that's the raw material side. Then you have those that are actually using prison labor directly to manufacture products or for call centers or whatever your DMV might be using prison labor to actually solve your problems. And then finally, it's those that are up the supply chain like the Whole Foods that sells cheese made on a farm that is staffed with prison labor. And so really understanding that entire gamut is like a key aspect of understanding what slavery looks like in our country today, because we are talking about people who make on average 14 cents an hour, about as much an hour as they probably pay on average for a phone call per minute, and don't have a single labor protection like you and I have. And so it's not just about the wages, but it's about discrimination laws. It's about workplace safety. It's about workers' comp. It's about every other piece that makes a dignified workplace. And so often I like to say, you know, the work that we're doing with a campaign called End the Exception is not to end prison labor, it's to end prison slavery.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bianca. You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, like, you know, like we give ourselves permission to look the other way depending on who's on the receiving end of the stick. You know, sometimes people ask, well, Johnny, what they do to get in there? You know, as if somehow we would justify the harm, or we hear something that allows us to say, well, and what does that look like in practice? That looks like firefighters in California fighting fires for like 20 cents an hour. You know, I myself worked at Coalcraft Industries while I was incarcerated, about 15 cents an hour for 5 years, sewing sheets, pillowcases, and underwears. To this day, I'm the best sewer ever. Took that skill with me. I sew my own clothes. Only to find out years later that I made Coalcraft over $1 million because I had a 20 dozen sheet quota per day. And guess what happens if I don't go to work? You go right to solitary confinement for a refusing program, which limits my access to visits, which limits my access to phone call, which limits my access to mail, which limits my access to food, which limits access to my sanity in many cases. That also looks like even more deeper. It looks like people literally dressed in stripes in Louisiana picking up garbage on the side of a roadway where correction officers on highways with long sticks and God knows what else.
Or still cotton.
Like, this is like in today's day and age, and how somehow if we put people in a certain category, we can enforce policies, and then once they're there, it's like the abyss. Because now the question doesn't say, well, this is right. The question is, hey, they're there for a reason. So it's like my experience of having that forced labor in the sense that, like, hey, if I don't work, that means I don't get to access to programs as well, because I need programs to also be released. And there's no programs like anger management, substance abuse treatment. Why substance abuse? Because I didn't say this before, but I spent a total 3 years in solitary. All of it was for smoking pot. And I'm not advocating for pot use, but I'm saying if you got 13 years in prison, you don't want to smoke a joint. Right? For those, you know, like whatever, people self-medicate. Some respond to anger and violence because it's an adverse environment. So people are reacting unnaturally to an unnatural environment. And we ask, well, you should figure it out. And the forced labor piece is even more demonic because for many years, I helped people's 401ks. You know, no retirement, no savings, you know, no way to support my son because now my daughter at the time, who's now 25, she was born 2 days before I was incarcerated, but asking this bigger question, does me being incarcerated exempt me from my role as a dad? My son is 6 now, thanks God. So I just want to like add that introduction and add that kind of like that flavor to like the bigger industrial piece and how it really does impact not only the person and the family, but the community as well. And therefore, and if you impact the community, then of course it spreads, et cetera. But, yeah.
Really quickly, you know, I think that last piece that you mentioned about your daughter was born 2 days before you went into prison. You know, a lot of times when we deny, for example, people in prison wages, for example, there's a conversation that happens where it's like, well, do people in prison, they're like paying their debt to society. And I'm like, okay, but do their children suffer? So their parent works 40 hours a week and sometimes more, but their child never gets a cent of child support. And instead they come out of prison with like mountains, tens of thousands of dollars in debt that they couldn't pay inside because no one ever paid them for the job that they were doing regularly every day, without a vacation day, without sick time, without anything, right? But I'll take you one step further, which is to say, what about the victims, right? You have a situation where you have victims who are owed restitution. How do you pay restitution of $20,000 at 9 cents an hour? So what debt is being paid? Do we, as a society, are we owed the debt or is the victim owed the debt? And if so, then why not actually allow them to pay that debt by providing all of those pieces, right? And as Johnny was saying, in terms of, solitary confinement being the punishment, if you don't go to work, there is no right to organize in prison. There is, not only is there no right, there are extreme punishments for organizing in prison, which is typically referred to as rioting or a number of things, which is not just solitary confinement, but you could be transferred, you can be denied visits with your family. And I just want you all to recognize that every single one of those examples is actually exactly what was used during antebellum slavery to punish people who came up against the regime at the time, right? Solitary confinement today is still often referred to as the hole or the box. Those are terms that initiated during antebellum slavery. The hot box, the hole. So all of our language hasn't changed. The separation of somebody from their children hasn't changed. The transferring of them in the middle of the night to another place, it hasn't changed. It just looks a lot different.
I'll add something, because I'll be remiss if I don't say this out loud, that solitary, is also used to silence harm, I learned from the women in the movement that much of their sexual assaults in prison are actually quelled with solitary. Shut you in a hole, blame it on you. We saw Robert Brooks get killed on camera. Everybody in the correctional facility, in those facilities, live in fear. What happens when your protector is the one harming you?
You talked about your daughter and familial relationships and, the ways in which people can maintain contact, with their loved ones is also an element of this too. About the telecom part of it, particularly the perniciousness of the video calling system. And I wonder if you all could talk about that.
Yeah. So telecom by itself is a $1.5 billion industry in prisons and jails. Again, I'm going to damage to the fact that we're in a business school. 90% of that industry is owned by just 3 companies, and all 3 of them are owned by private equity firms. And the one thing that's true when something's owned by a private equity firm or any other financier is that there's a lot more hands in the cookie jar that all need to be paid. And so naturally the margins get bigger, the exploitation is more aggressive. And for many, many years, families who were families who had a loved one incarcerated would be paying as much as $25 for a 15-minute phone call, right? Those costs were driving families into massive amounts of debt. In fact, 1 in 3 families with a loved one who's incarcerated goes into debt over the simple cost of trying to stay connected. If you remember your experience during COVID of actually that level of disconnection and how important a simple phone call was, then you can understand how much that means to somebody who never gets to see or touch their family. But on the video call side of things, when we get to the most pernicious sort of aspect of this industry, a number of years ago, players in the industry decided to contractually require that prisons and jails stopped visits, contact and in-person visits, just so that they could drive the use of their communication, their expensive communication systems, right? And I like to say this because I think it's really important because
So the people cannot see their loved ones.
That's
so they're
right.
forced to use these mechanisms these profit-driven mechanisms if they were going to have any contact whatsoever.
Right. And there are tactics to this, and the tactics are not just legal and contractual or policy, they're also narrative-based. So one thing that whenever I hear this, always sparks my interest, I'm like, ooh, we gotta work on that, is the term video visitation. You have never video called somebody and said, I'm about to visit you. Why have we adopted the language of video visitation? This is language that was created by the industry to justify the elimination of real visits with a calling system, a FaceTime, a Zoom, not a visit, right? And I say that because I like to tell people not all slogans are trademarked, right? This is a corporate slogan that has gotten so far into our sort of consciousness that now I hear people say like, oh, are you gonna do an in-person visit or a video visit? I'm like, there's no such thing. If I visit them, I'm visiting them, right? I am going somewhere. I am going to be with that person. But that's what the industry did. And as a result of that, hundreds of prisons lost their visits. And I left one very key important piece out, which is that part of the reason many of these jails acquiesce to this is because the companies promised them a cut. So all these prisons and jails started taking money from these services and saying, well, yeah, we'll do that because we get now part of our bottom line is served by these particular services. And then what happened was basically hundreds of these jails lost visits. And in place of their visits, they built kiosks where they would tell families, well, you can make these video calls from home or you could come to the jail and do it for free. So I'm standing in the jail where my loved one is upstairs in another room somewhere else and I got to get on a video call with them. And only that way is it free, which by the way, now I've left work, I'm in a car, I need to do this whole thing of like showing up at this jail and they're feet from me and I can't hold them. Because somebody has decided this is how they're going to make a buck. And as a result, there was a lot of pushback, and there's now actually some legal cases in a project called Right to Hug that we're involved with to push back on this. And the companies are saying, oh, we're so sorry. You know what? You're kind of right. That was terrible. So we're going to stop doing that. But their kiosks have already replaced the visit rooms, and there's no going back. The jails are now dependent on this revenue, and the gig is up, even though now they want to clean their hands of it.
It's like they take it away from you and then try to sell it back to you. You know, it's like we'll sell you back your humanity. You know, I was 21 years old. You know, head of the household even at 21, and you know, upstate. You know, my daughter's mother was 18 years old at the time. So really early on, not only the head of the household removed and being held accountable for his actions, let's just name that, right? Because I think we can have accountability without undermining or dehumanizing people, et cetera. But now I'm paying $30 or so for half an hour. I'm 12 hours away from home, so she has to like leave the day before. And it's a financial burden that to this day I probably may never comprehend because she had to fend for that on her own. That was a sentence that she served on the outside as the mother of my two-day-old daughter at the time, you know? And then even years later, you know, finally visitation and you're able to like hug somebody for the first time in like 5-6 years. And what does it mean when you're able to like really hug somebody? You ever had a hard day, you come home, you hug somebody, you just want to like exhale. If it's really big, really hard, you'll cry. In prison, that feeling is tenfold. So when you don't get to do that, it's different types of outlets that sometimes we point attention to without, you know, kind of understanding the underlying fact to why people respond in such a way in many cases. And then there's the folks making money all the entire process along the way. This is why I was so happy. I never thought I'd see the day where phone calls would be free because it's needed. I would say it's a human right to be able to talk to your family, you know, to see your family, you know, to hold my daughter, you know, and my kids. So I think this conversation is more important than ever, you know, and I think the opposite of separation is unity in all its different ways.
So we have time for some questions. We have a microphone here, a microphone here. And you know, while you're making your way to the microphone, I have one final question of my own, which is, what are the most important things for people to do if they've read this book and they've seen just how widespread and damaging the situation is? You know, what can people do?
Yeah, Well, I want to piggyback off the last thing that Johnny said, because Johnny made alluded to something that we haven't talked about, which is, at Worth Rises, we've been fighting to make the simple, act of calling a loved one accessible by simply making it free. It's 2025. We're in the city of New York. On every single New York City block, there is a kiosk where you can call anywhere in the country for free. If we can do that for 8 million people, we can do that for the 2 who are currently incarcerated. And so we have been passing pieces of legislation all over the country to make communication free in prisons and jails. And today we're up to a number of counties, 5 states, the federal system. We have over 300,000 currently incarcerated people who have access to fully free phone calls, something so simple. 2.5 billion additional call minutes that we've been able to generate between people who are incarcerated and their families to talk about their love for each other, to plan for their release, to talk about employment, housing, whatever the needs are. And over $500 million that have been saved for families. And I say that because it's important as we talk about what can you do, to know that things are being done and there is hope and there is actual real pathways to change. And so the first thing I would say is get involved in some way, whatever your way is. That could be informing others. Pick up the book. Everybody should have gotten a free copy. If you have a copy, give one to a friend. And learn, get informed, get educated, educate others about what the prison industry is, because outrage does drive action. Hopelessness does not, which is why we do need to talk about the successes and the wins. Follow our work at Worth Rises, work of folks like Johnny. You can do it on any of the social platforms at Worth Rises. You can sign up for our newsletter to also get actionable items consistently. Things like signing petitions can actually go a really long way. When you get one of those emails from organizations like ours, take the 60 seconds to fill out the form. It really makes a difference. Obviously, donate. We're nonprofit organizations. We all need donations. And so there are just a multitude of ways, and I would just put the one plug in for go to endtheexception.com if you really want to end prison slavery, and take that 60-second action to contact your Congress member.
I'll say, thanks, yes. I'll plan really quickly. Mine is really short. Ditto to everything she said, definitely. Make sure you get her card. If you don't have the book, get it. Get her to sign it too, because, people like leaders like this are hard to come by. And honestly, any other time in these talks I go down to support the org, do this, Honestly, right now, I just need people to vote with their values. I need people to take leadership roles. Whatever that looks like in your own space. If you're here, we have some type of shared values. Do a little bit more, definitely show up to the talk, but also run for office. If you think things should be done better, we need leadership. There's a woman out of Baltimore that said, she said, I'm freeing all black people and making weed legal. It's like, whatever your platform is, but this idea that we have to take leadership in some way, let your values guide you. In any given situation, principles will fall on your lap. You have to ask yourself, what is the principle that governs my behavior in this moment? And I think the more we ask ourselves that, the map will become clearer and clearer and clearer and even more clearer. And it'll gladly guide you to these places of folks who have shared values. But I think right now, pick a side or pick a side. There's no standing aside. Thanks.
Moderator, I want to thank y'all. Great panel. I learned a lot, and I know a lot about this, but I still know more. I've been watching y'all for years, both of y'all. Fighters, y'all been doing it. My question is, how do you stay resolute in light of the past 90 days, 2025, and what words of encouragement would you share with the people being targeted, but also the people not being targeted that don't agree with that?
Thank you, Jimmy. Nice to see you. Okay. The last 90 days have been tough. I don't think I need to tell that to anyone. And I know where we're sitting. It's also has tough moments and all of that. I tell people all the time that two things. One, I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't believe in it, and I didn't believe that things could change. And I think that every movement and different generations have gone through these moments. As bad as and as awful as we know that it is right now, not 200 years ago. And I think we need to pay homage a little bit to our ancestors who have also suffered through different moments and have gotten us to here, and it is our sort of duty to get us to the next generation. So I think having hope and a reflection of history and where we come from, I think is really critical. I think beyond that is one of the places that I find the most amount of hope in a most ironic way is in prison. There are people sitting in this room who had life sentences, who were never supposed to come home. I got a call from prison in the Uber on my way here. There is a reality, right, that we have a luxury, we have a privilege, we have what we have because we are free in this space. And if folks in these dark places can have hope enough to fight forever to get home to a place that never wants them back, then we have a responsibility to have that hope too.
I'll say real quick, I'll say real quick, when you said, how you keep resolute, I was like, what makes you think I'm resolute, It's like we all got nice shoes, but somebody in here got holes in their socks. Like some of us are just barely keeping it together, And I want to hold space for that. You don't always have to have it perfect, you know what I'm saying? It's like when somebody said, Johnny, how did you handle your time? Who said I handled it? Right? You'd be surprised what we can accomplish when we have no other choice but to accomplish it. Johnny, how'd you do 13 years in prison? I had no choice but to do 13 years in prison. So you do it. It's like no how. Now parts of it is that what gives me resolution is it's like knowing that a lot of folks who don't look like me are really activated right now, because I think that's part of what's needed. Because leaders like myself and others are really vulnerable for many different reasons that we can't even say out loud nowadays. I even question some of my face even on flyers anymore. So people know exactly where I'm at. So I think there's the okay, let's get in there. And that's okay too. But leaving room for it and knowing that, okay, it's not going to be perfect, but there is no choice but to be able to wake up and fight another day. And some people don't make it. Again, R.P. Robert Brooks. Everybody don't make it. And I don't know how far I'm going to make it, because I come to y'all with a sense of urgency. I'm on counting time, y'all. So part of it is that you run your best race and you pass that baton. And whatever happens after that, I know I ran my best race. And that's what gives me peace at the end of the day.
It may not be on.
Yeah. You want to go to that mic over there?
Or can somebody turn that on for them?
Go ahead, Mr. X, project.
Yeah.
I've seen you at rallies before. You can project. Come on.
Not today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Long time, people.
Oh,
Thank
it's
you.
still not on.
Yeah. What's going on with the mics?
Speak up, Ms. X.
Okay. Now, I thought
All
you
right.
were older than me. I didn't realize you're younger than me. No. To you and Bianca, how long would it take you to advocate for free calls all through the state, all through all 62 counties? How much longer would that? I mean, you covered some counties, you didn't cover all of them. And so I'm asking, how much longer would it take you to cover the remaining state with or without Eric Adams, Joseph Biden, Kathy Hochul, and Donald Trump, AKA the Mod Squad?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Egg. So great to see you.
That's all I want to know. How much it will take?
Yeah.
With or without the Mod Squad?
Sure, thank you. So it's a great question. So New York City was the very first city where we made communication free, as Mr. X knows, and that was back in 2018. We are actively working at the state level, and what I can say without breaching conversations that are had in confidence is that I believe that we will have good news in the state of New York soon. I'm looking at one of my team members over there who are like, God willing. But hopefully soon for at least state prisons in New York. In terms of broader counties and all of that, last year we were able to pass a major piece of federal regulation. If everybody's stomach just dropped, I know. Trust me, we're working on it. But we did pass a major piece of regulation at the FCC that wildly capped phone call rates across the country, across jails and prisons. And so if not getting all the way to free for all counties in the state of New York, or more broadly, we will see a massive, well, we should already see because they went into effect April 1st, a massive sort of cut down of rates from that regulation. And now it is just pressed upon us to protect those regulations with all of our might, which, is a tough road right now. But, beyond that, I think it'll be a number of more years until we get to the county jails, but I am really hopeful about the state prisons soon.
Hello. Thank you for writing this and being here. I did not know that communication can be free. I talked to someone who he doesn't like phones, so we do JPay messages, which is fine. I'll pay for the stamps, that's fine. But I did not know that we could do phone calls for free. I don't think he's going to want to anyway.
Where is he?
So I realized, I hear the whole progress is slow. We're going step by step. I work in Oklahoma. For every terrible thing that's happening in the state of New York, Oklahoma's like 100 years backwards.
Alabama.
And I do love the people of Oklahoma. I'm not shitting on anyone. It's just politically a bad situation. We are struggling, my organization, people I work with, we're daily struggling on how to start a narrative, how to get through to legislators. I realize you do a lot of work in New York, but the companies that you're fighting work on a national level.
Oh, yeah.
Just starting points, ideas of, I'm excited to read it, but which of these industries do you feel like we could start to crumble a little in places like Oklahoma or Alabama, Mississippi?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few things. One, Worth Rises, we're a national organization, so we do work all over the country. And we are in many, many states, I think, team, more than a dozen, working on things like communication. And so I would definitely just encourage you first to talk to, everybody from Worth Rises, raise your hand. Okay, talk to one of those beautiful people. And they can help you at least kind of get started with some ideas. We actually, for Telecom, do have a whole messaging guide that can help you with things like narrative. I think we found that Telecom was actually the best entry point. This is a big book with a lot of harms. We can't tackle them all at once. And we picked Telecom because it was among the most accessible. I think you look at a legislator and you say, does every kid deserve to hear I love you? And it's that's the beginning of the conversation, right? And it's from that point that you actually can hit from all sides of the aisle and everything, family narratives about the industry. There are ways to reach people regardless of what their values are, and it's just prudent upon us to figure out what that is. So I do often say Telecom is a really great place to start. But medical co-pays in prison, shocking, but yeah, that happens too. Commissary, like there's a long litany of stuff, but yeah, I'd say it's a good entry point.
How about 1999?
Hold on 1 second. So, given that we're short on time, let's do two things. Let's cap like the questions here. So we'll stop with the group of people who we have now, and then we will have the young person over here with with his question, and then we'll go see if we can do two at a time for the last one. And the floor is yours.
How about 1999?
About it.
I asked, how about 1999?
What about 19?
Huh?
The year? 1999? What about it?
Are prisoners still in jail right now?
Oh, that were put in prison in 1999?
Mm-hmm.
John, you want to take that one?
Yeah. How old are you?
6?
6. That's my son's age. Elias, he's 6. Yeah, we do live in a country that holds people inside of prison and cells for all of their lives. You know, generations. In fact, I've seen one sentence that was like 100 years plus whatever, which talks to you about the absurdity of it to even bring it even deeper. And thank you for that question. But unfortunately, yes.
So we'll do these two questions.
1999 is the year that I went to prison. I'm a fan of all of your work, so let me just say that. I'm just wondering, do you have, or can you offer any sort of thought analysis around the connective tissue between, as we think about for-profit prisons and all the industry that's connected to it, we're in an era when this is a international industry. And as we think about what's happening in current events, as just a fee for incarcerated, for humans, period, I'm wondering, do you see any what is the connective tissue? And also, like, maybe you have some insight into, are there corporations overlapping into this new frontier?
Okay, and then your question, yeah, can you ask your question succinctly?
I'll try very hard. Hi, my name's Tanya Pope. I work here at Columbia. I'm Assistant Vice President in Construction. I used to have another title that had a D in it, but they changed it a few days ago. And
You were in charge of data?
I'm responsible for making sure that socially and economically disadvantaged folks are working on our construction projects and firms are working. I applaud you for your belief in second chances, and I just wanted to share a very quick story with this audience about my epiphany on second chances. I work with a nonprofit organization called Pathways to Apprenticeship, and I found that over 85% of the folks that come through that program are previously justice involved. And we had a graduation for the class. We try to hold the graduations at Columbia to give them a sense of accomplishment. They get their first tool bag and their hard hat. And there was a fellow in the class who was 53 years old. And this was going to be his first real job. And he had been in and out of the system for many, many years. And as he walked up to get his certificate, his almost 90-year-old mother said, "That's my baby." And that helped me to understand the power of second chances. I'm a friend of the Tamer Center, and so thank you for the work that you do.
We can take the last question, just because it's only one more, and then we'll do those last two.
We'll get that one.
Oh, yeah, we can add the last question in.
Yeah.
Hi. So I work for State Senator Julia Salazar, who's the chair of the Crime Victims, Crimes and Corrections Committee in the State Senate. And I think that we really approach our work from a lens of abolition when it comes to prisons and incarceration in general. And so I am just curious, I think one of you had talked about the contradiction that is the phrase like a humane prison. And so I'm curious how you balance the work of these like short-term goals, like free phone calls, like in-person visitation, all of that, with the like larger long-term goal of the ultimate abolition of prisons within United States, within the state of New York, all of that. So, thank you.
Okay, I can jump in. So on Marlon's question, you know, it's, I think what recently happened, and for those who are not following this, because it's misery, you know, we are deporting people right now, but we are also detaining people. In order to deport people, we have to detain people first. It's like a whole system. And now we're starting to detain people in places like Guantanamo Bay, and then most recently, we've shipped them out to El Salvador. And you know, I think it's important, some of your just like very concrete answers to your question is that some of the private prisons, which albeit they only make up 8% of the correctional system, they make up over 90% of the immigration detention system. The facility in Guantanamo is actually run by a private prison. And so private prisons really do span a lot of our sort of global ecosystem. And for example, Geo Group, which is one of the largest private prison companies in the country, also has prisons in the UK and Australia and South Africa. So there are, you know, there's only a few other places that have these things other than the United States, but they are out there. And I think you make a really important point about what's going on in El Salvador. You know, prisons and jails, as hopefully everyone will take away from this one talk, are a business. And they're a business in more than one way, and sometimes between governments, not just private corporations. One thing that this, you know, I hope also comes through in this book is that it's not just about corporations, it is about the complicity of government actors as well. And so it is through that we see a lot of this, because right now there are county jails that are vying for contracts from the federal government so that they can get a per diem rate from the federal government for holding somebody who's detained on immigrant status. In the same way that now we're exporting that all the way to El Salvador, where now other countries are vying for our federal dollars because they want our taxpayer money. And so that should be alarming if what you're trying to do and what this administration kind of claims to do is trying to bring everything in-house to the United States. It's funny that we're sending our literal federal dollars elsewhere. So that's, I think, a lot, and I think that, you know, that global discussion needs to be happening on the issue of incarceration. On the question that was over here about the balance of, I think, sort of, right, the balance of reforms and abolition, I think the way that we think about it a lot of the times is pursue any reforms that don't get in the way of abolition, right? As another great leader who's in the audience, Cassandra Frederick, has said many times, it's like, you can ride this train for us as long as you want towards abolition. You can get off whenever you want, just don't derail the train for the rest of us, right? And importantly, something like making communication free in prisons is absolutely part of that journey, because it gets people home faster and it keeps people home. And because one of the stories that I've heard recently out of Connecticut where we made communication free was that people inside are actually also able to organize now with people on the outside. And so it's a tool as much as it also is the sort of the gift, right, or the relief that it creates. And so that's how we sort of think about it. That's the end goal, but we're on a journey. And I don't think we should be so idealistic that we forget that people are suffering today, right? It is a privilege to live in that world.
Yeah, I'll add to like it's not a either or, it's a yeah and, you know. And over the last 3.5 years, or 3 years, I want to say, we've seen about 40 people die on Rikers Island, you know. Hence, like the importance of why we can't turn a blind eye to what's happening like there now, you know. Something that you said to Marlon's question just made me think about the profiteering in prison. I really want people to like really not forget this on the way out, is that, you know, regardless of the language that's being used, it's literally the buying and selling of human beings. It's in the title. It's in the ingredients. For-profit prison. And nobody wants to see profit walk out the door, right? And if you Google private prison cell, you'll see a film by New Line, which literally shows a private prison being auctioned off, and you would think they were talking about cans in a warehouse. You would not think they were talking about human beings. They're not talking about people, they're talking about product. right? The CEO of Jail Group said, this is good for business, unquote. Good for business when you're running a for-profit prison. And then when you don't get to decide who gets to go in there, who's criminalized, who's labeled, who's not. And I think to these current events, we're also living in the day and age where I think, admittedly, there have been people who haven't committed no crime who have been in these places. So up until this point was, John, if you break the law, you'll go to prison. But what happens when you don't break the law and find yourself there in a different foreign country where you don't know the language, have no connection to, and you don't even have access to your own attorney? Privileges that we take for granted every single day. You know, so don't want that to get lost, that there's people making money off of this right now as we speak, under the guise of criminality or security, et cetera.
I'm gonna add one last thing, because I know we got to wrap. But your last point, just, I really want to leave people with this because it reminded me of something. I think oftentimes we're told, right, and the public is told that prisons exist to keep us safe. And that's just, this industry does not exist to keep us safe. And the best example of that is that the largest private prison companies in the country, CoreCivic and Geo Group, are both publicly traded. They both file annual reports with the SEC. And in their annual reports, they are required to disclose risks to their business for shareholders and investors. And in their risks to their business is a reduction in crime. So if you believe that this is a system that is meant to and designed to keep us safe, remember that the very companies that are engaged in this know that if crime goes down, so does their profits and everything around it. And once you unpack that, you start to ask yourself, what is actually going to really keep us safe?
So before we wrap up, I want to ask, you know, can you raise your hand if you can, you're willing to purchase a copy of this book for a friend to make sure this book gets into someone else's hands? All right. All right, thank you. We can put our hands down. Can you raise your hand if you are willing to do a social media post to make sure that somebody sees information about this book? Okay. Now, can you raise your hand if you were willing to tell 3 people about this book to make sure that the word of mouth about it continues to spread? Now, everybody should raise their hand for this, all right? It's the easiest thing. You can walk out right there on Broadway and just like first person you see. And then lastly, for those people who've been raising your hands, can you then put your hands together and thank Johnny and Bianca for being here this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to the sponsoring organizations. Thank you to all of you for coming out, and have a good evening.
Nice, thank you.
We're all going to head to the reception, which is on the 3rd floor. Okay.